Hey, welcome to All About Nonprofits with Vanessa Lindsay. Today we're going to talk about time ticking away. Time keeps on ticking into the future. I know some of you know that time just keeps on ticking into the future. But what I want to talk about is that 1 minute was the difference between $250,000 and walking away with nothing. And I was just about to find out how 1 minute can feel. 1 minute can just change the trajectory of everything. There's some experience in nonprofit leadership that stay with you for a very long time after they're over. And there's so many of them that teach you some lessons. And I don't know, you can go through it a couple times, but finally, when you get that last lesson, you're like, okay. And this was one of mine. What happened that day changed the way I approached important deadlines, even though I knew along the way about the deadlines and not wait to the last minute. But when you're wearing so many different hats, and we know about the different hats that we wear, right? So when you're wearing so many different hats, you're like, look, I'm trying to juggle. It's hard. But I really had to change the way I looked at things, and things haven't been the same. So check it out. I was working on a grant application, and I had reached to the point where there was only one thing left to do, and that was to get it submitted, right? I had done all the work, but as I was trying to get the application through, I started running into the problems. And you know the problems. I'm sure those of you that have written grants, you know some of the problems. So you could tick these off as I'm talking about it, because they'll be like, yep, I've gone through that. The internet was slow. I would try to submit and I would get an error. I would try again, and you know that little thing that just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. You're like, come on. And something still wasn't working. Then at one point, the internet went out completely. It's like, oh my gosh, what? I don't have any internet service. Call the provider. Call whoever you need to call, but tell them I need to get this internet back on. Now I'm sitting there with this grant application that has to be submitted. A deadline that it's not changing, and there is no negotiation. And technology that has apparently decided it doesn't care about any of that. And I don't even want to talk about when I'm trying to submit it on the portal to where I'm supposed to be submitting this application that it's having glitches, because you know what? There's a whole lot of other people submitting that same doggone proposal. So if you ever submitted a grant application online, you know that until you receive that confirmation, you are not finished. You have written a beautiful application. You have gathered everything they asked for. You have spent all the time getting it ready, and you have spent over 60 to 100 hours writing and kind of perfecting this thing, right? But until that system says your application has been received, you're still sitting there wondering, did it go through? So I kept trying. The internet wouldn't cooperate, and then it just wouldn't. It would not go. I would try to submit it, and then I would get another error. I even called the company and said, look, I am trying to submit this, and this is what's going on. They said, okay, try this and try that. I'm like, this password isn't working. And they kept walking me to it. And so finally, they walked me through it and I got it. But the internet, that doggone internet, I had to deal with it and try it again, knowing that the deadline was getting closer. And I was like 5 minutes out, right? It's like, oh my God, it's 5 minutes. And then within the 5 minutes, I'm like stressing, the sweat pouring down, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to get this done. And then somebody's came in and knocking at the door and came in and said, such and such is on the phone for you. Now you have to understand where I was at mentally at that moment. I was stressing. I was frustrated. I was about to lose $250,000, and I'm trying to submit this application. I'm having problems with the internet. I'm getting errors, and the internet had gone out, but it's back on now. I'm watching the deadline get closer and closer. 4 minutes. And somebody comes and telling me somebody's on the phone. I was like, I don't care. Don't you see I'm on the deadline for this grant? Nothing is more important. I don't care about who's on the phone. Well, of course, when they come in, they have that person on the phone because they're holding it to me. Hey, somebody's on the phone. Okay. But at that moment, I meant it. I didn't care who was calling. I didn't ask what they wanted. I didn't want another interruption. Get out of my office. All I could see was that application and that deadline and the internet just spinning, right? So I went back to try to get the application submitted. I kept working through the problems because there wasn't another option. There was no option. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't tell the funder my internet was slow. The funder would have been like, should have waited till the last day. I couldn't tell that. I couldn't tell them that it just was not my fault. I couldn't tell them that their system kept giving me errors. They're like, yeah, you shouldn't have waited till the very last day. The deadline was the deadline, and I needed to get the application through. And so let me tell you something about this deadline. Those of you, you know it. When they says it's due at 5 o'clock, it doesn't mean 5:01. They don't mean that. So they meet exactly 5 o'clock, and you better get it in there by 4:55, right? Oh, but eventually I got to the point where I was able to submit, and it was like at 4:59. Depending on whose clock you take a look at, right? My clock could have said 4:59. Their clock could have said something different. But I finally got it to go. And when I hit that submit button, it said it was submitted, but I didn't know if I reached the deadline. So I waited and I waited. And you know what I'm waiting for, right? I sat there waiting for the confirmation to come through my email to let me know what time it was submitted. And so even though I submitted, I was like, whew, submitted at 4:59 my time. Honey, I needed to see that stamp on whether or not that was submitted. I was so exhausted. And you know, as running a nonprofit, and you know, writing a grant alone is exhausting. But then when you have phone calls and you have all these other things that you have to contend with that's competing with your time, you know that exhaustion was real. I didn't want to answer another question. I didn't want to solve another problem, and I didn't want to deal with anything else. I just needed to get away for a moment, so I went outside for a breath of fresh air. I went outside to give some gratitude. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, I'm telling you, be prepared for this, okay? And you talking about be grateful, be grateful. I was so grateful that application had gone through. It was finally over. Oh, but then it was all the other fires that happened along the way. There was that phone call. Should I have stopped submitting the grant, take the call? No, I should not have stopped submitting that grant, take the call. It was not worth $250,000 when we know what's on the line when you're running a nonprofit, right? So I was facing the deadline, and it was what it was. But what that did teach me was that people need to be clear. If I'm writing a grant and I'm submitted, don't come interrupt me with anything unless it's truly a life or death emergency. There was no room for any interruption. And I just said, hey, this is what it is. So I don't know how many grant writers we have out there, but I'm sure if you're running a nonprofit, you have run into this with grant writing. And if you haven't, trust me, you're going to run into so many different things. What's the wonderful thing about this, I'm going to have to say, is that they're being submitted online. Before, we had to take it, drive across town, so you didn't know what traffic you was going to get into. You had to print like 5 to 10 different copies and get it in the mail. You didn't know if your copier was going to break down. Oh my gosh, I can tell you some stories. But anyway, if the funder says the grant is due on Friday, Friday is their deadline. It doesn't have to be mine. It is not my deadline. In fact, after that experience and previous experience, which I know, but sometimes you just get caught up against the wall. It just is what it is, right? So I started giving myself a 3-day buffer, maybe a 4-day buffer. If the deadline is actually Friday, I don't want to be sitting there Friday trying to submit the grant. I want the deadline to be earlier because I already know something can happen. The internet can be slow. The system can give you an error. Something is going to need your attention. You might not feel good on that Friday. You know, something you thought was finished can suddenly need to be addressed. Oh my goodness. You don't even know how many times you go up through that application and you're like, crap, I forgot that piece, right? So the official deadline doesn't leave room for anything. It doesn't leave room for error. It doesn't leave room for being human. It just doesn't need room. That's why I created the room myself. And if I'm working with other people, I create even more room. If I have my deadline set for Tuesday and I know the grant's due on Friday, I tell the people that I need their information by the previous Friday and let them know, hey, this is the deadline because I'm submitting this grant on Tuesday. That's not to be difficult. That's managing the process. If I'm the one writing the grant and I'm the lead on it, this is what's going to be happening. It's going to be done this way. Because one thing that experience taught me is that margin is an extra time you don't need. Margin is what keeps an ordinary problem from becoming an emergency, that extra buffer. I need that buffer time, okay? So let's talk about what that looks like in practice because I know how nonprofit work happens. We can say, I'm going to finish this early, but then the phone rings. Somebody needs something. Another priority shows up. Guess what? You may get an audit along the way. It's like, oh my gosh, somebody's coming to audit. You're dealing with problems. You have staff, funding, operations, the board, the people you serve, and everything else that comes with running your organization. That's exactly why you need a system instead of good intentions. You've got to have a system. We all have good intentions. Oh, I'm going to submit this application. I'm going to get it on time. So when you see that a grant application is due on a particular date, I want you to change how you think about that date. This is not the day you're planning to finish. This is the last day the funder has told you they will accept your application. There's a big difference. When I was trying to submit that $250,000 application, the official deadline had become my deadline. And because there was no room left between the two, every technical problem carried enormous weight. Heavy, heavy, heavy. Slow internet isn't unusual. An internet outage isn't something we can always control, and that's not unusual in this day and age. An online system giving you errors, that's not unheard of. We always get it with all the new apps and stuff that's out there, and everybody that's creating apps and that's online. You need a couple days because those problems are going to come and you're going to need some time to work those problems out. The problem didn't necessarily become bigger because my buffer and my time and my margin became smaller. That's an important distinction because sometimes we tell ourselves everything went wrong, right? Maybe several things did go wrong, but another question we have to ask is how much room did I leave myself to allow those things to go wrong? Because what is that law? Y'all know the Murphy's Law, right? So I learned my answers that I didn't give myself enough time. No matter how much I say I want to give myself enough time. And sometimes I still kind of push it, okay? But I'd like to give myself at least a 2-day buffer time. That's my max. It's like that's the least amount of time I'm given to when that application is due. So for now, as soon as I hear an application is due, I'm going to start working on it immediately. I start getting pieces together so I will be ready in the time. Because that doesn't guarantee that nothing's going to go wrong, of course. The point isn't to create a perfect process where nothing unexpected ever happens. The point is to have enough room to respond when it does. Let me repeat that, okay? Make sure you have enough room to respond when that crisis happens, because we know as a nonprofit leader, as a nonprofit development, we are always in crisis management mode. Those of you who have been running a nonprofit, we're in crisis mode. I'm a fireman. I'm always putting out fires, but there's always the crisis. And it may be this tiny crisis, but it's a big thing because it needs to be addressed. The second thing I changed was how I handled deadlines with other people involved. A grant application may have one person's name on it, but that doesn't mean one person provided everything needed to complete it. You may be waiting on information or other documents from somebody else before you can finish the things that you're responsible for. You may be like, hey, I need their MOU. I need a letter of support. I need the organization's resumes. I need the organization chart. I need these things. So here's what nonprofit leaders can accidentally create a problem for themselves. We know the grant is due on Friday, so we tell everybody, I need your information by Friday. No. If I need work to be completed by Friday, I can't make Friday your deadline too. And I've already moved my deadline up to Wednesday, and I don't necessarily want to give you what I need Wednesday either. I need to receive it in time, review it, and make sure I have what I need. And if you're writing a grant with somebody else and they tell you their deadline, give them their stuff early. Let's say the official deadline is Friday. Okay, we know it's Wednesday. So here's a simple system I want you to try. I call it the 3 deadline system. And you can use it for your next grant application, report, major proposal, or anything else where missing the deadline has consequences. First, write down the official deadline. This is the date the funder or whoever is receiving the information gave you. We're not changing that date. We're simply recognizing it for what it is, the outer limit, okay? Then move backward at least 2 days. That's your deadline. Put it on your calendar. Treat it seriously. That's the date you're working towards your completion for submission. Then ask yourself, who owes me something? Who else am I going to be working on this application with? And then notify them and let them know I'm going to be working on this application. This is the deadline. These are the things I'm going to need from you. Have a checklist. Give them a checklist. Give them the deadline and let them know when you need this done, because you're going to need to review it. I've had people submit stuff to me and they forgot to sign it. It's like, oh, I ain't even gonna lie, I forgot to sign some things, because you're so in the thick of it. So I want the information a couple of days so I can review it, okay? So I want you to think about the last time you were up against a deadline and everything felt urgent. Whether it's writing a grant, whether it's submitting an application, whether it's meeting with a client, something when you were up against a line that really felt urgent. How were you behaving? Were you rushing? Were you anxious? Were you getting frustrated with people? Did every interruption feel like somebody was stopping you from doing what you needed to do? Now I want you to ask yourself a different question. Was everything actually an emergency? Or had you run out of margin? Because one of the things that we do, and I know I do it, it's like I said, we're in crisis management. So everything is a crisis and everyone thinks that everything else is a crisis because what's important to them is important to them, and we all have a job to do. And if you're that person that everyone comes to and expect to have all the answers, they're going to come to you because what they're doing is an emergency on their end. And it could be, it's a client that may need services. It's a funder that's on the line. It's a contract. It's a monitor, it's something that's going on. It's a staff person that's sick and they're calling in. And you have to be able to have buffers in place that says, hey, when these things happen, I know that I'm ahead of this grant application. Because you can't control every deadline that comes into your organization. Funders will set deadlines, reports will be due, other people in the organization will need things from you at specific times, but you can control how you build your internal process around these deadlines. And a little bit of space can change more than whether you submit something on time. And think about how many applications are being submitted on that deadline, and they're going to bog down that system. So you don't want to be one of those clogs in the wheel, right? You want to be ahead of the game. So if you remember 3 things from this episode, remember these. The deadline is not your deadline. The official deadline is the last possible date. Giving yourself an earlier internal deadline is your deadline. Work backward when people are involved. If you need information from someone else, their deadline needs to come before yours so you have time to review and respond. And then buffer. Buffer protects more than the work. It protects your ability to think, respond, make decisions, and lead without turning every unexpected problem into a crisis. And then it gives you time to review your application, okay? Because if you're in that push it to the end, you don't have time to review that application, and you want to try to review as much as you can. So here's your mission, and you could do this in less than 15 minutes. Pull up the next major grant, report, proposal, or other important deadline on your calendar. Look at the official due date and then move backward at least 2 days. Put your new internal deadline on the calendar. Then identify anyone who you're supposed to be doing something with that you're supposed to meet. Give them a list, give them a date, and let them know I need this stuff. Send them reminders if you can. Go ahead and put it on your calendar. Schedule an email and say, hey, just double checking to see if you're going to get that stuff to me on time. Okay? You want those extra days available if you need them. You just don't want to plan on not needing them. Okay? So that day, I got the grant application submitted. I received the confirmation email. I looked at the timestamp, and I knew I had made it with seconds to spare. I was relieved, I was grateful, and I was exhausted. But what stayed with me wasn't simply that I made the deadline. What stayed with me was I need to ensure that I keep my buffer. I had set buffers previously, but sometimes you get so busy, and I've got to remember that, keep that a hard stop. I didn't want my success to depend on whether the internet stayed connected for another minute. I don't want an error message to have the power to throw everything into a crisis. And I don't want to be so consumed by a deadline that I have no room left for anything or anybody else. I want to be able to breathe while everybody else is putting their application in. You know yours has been submitted. You got your application. You got time to spare. That's why today when I see an official deadline, I see 3 dates. I don't even see their date. I just know my date is before their date. And I decide when the application is due before their date. Don't even think about deciding after. And then you have to make sure you look at, if you decide to just have to push it, look at their timeline, okay? Look at the time when it's submitted. So before you move on with your day, look at what's coming up on your calendar and give yourself some margin. Don't wait until you're sitting at a computer thinking about how much 1 minute could cost you. The deadline is not your deadline. Don't just listen, implement. Now, what I've done, which is really cool, I created an event planner that you can put all of your grant applications, anything that's going on in your organization, anything that's going on that you need to have on this planner. And it lets you know, hey, I'm working with this person. These are all the things that each of us is supposed to be doing in this grant application. And you can put all the tasks on there. It's a really cool event planner. So if you want to know more about the event planner, I'm going to go ahead and it's going to be connected in the description of this video and learn more about it. But I actually teach that in a class. It's how to use it, and we give each other support and accountability and training on getting grants completed and other things completed. Because remember, this podcast is all about nonprofits, and that's what we teach and that's what we do. So until I speak to you again, I want to wish you a very, very happy day. Thank you for listening to All About Nonprofits, and hopefully you have learned something that you can implement so you can get the transformation you're looking for. Thanks again for listening, and I will speak to you soon. Peace.